The following program is part one of two parts. Each part is an hour long. There is support material available at this website, including quizzes, handouts, and lecture outlines for all presentations. Consult the UCTV programming guide for the part two, and other lectures in the series will be shown.
What I'm going to talk about are vertebrate pests. When we say vertebrates, we're talking about animals with backbones. So rats, mice, squirrels, woodpeckers, deer, rattlesnakes, all of those animals with vertebrates. I'm not going to talk about all of those. Like all of your speakers, I mean, I've spent my life learning about vertebrate pests and how to deal with them, and I know a little bit, but there's a lot that I don't know. I can't give you everything in 2 hours so that you'll be excellent master gardeners in this area. I'm sure you're excellent in others, and some of you in this area as well. What I want to do today is I want to give you some principles, some things to think about, so that when you get a question that I didn't teach you or tell you what I think the answer is, that you can figure it out yourself. And so we're going to talk about some biology and some ecology and some animal behavior, because if you know that, I think you'll be able to at least start the process of answering the questions that you're going to get from homeowners, gardeners, park managers, and others about dealing with vertebrate pests. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about some principles. And then I'm going to go into some of the more common pests that you might deal with, and hopefully you'll see how these principles start to work. The first thing I want to say is there is no magic box. There is no thing that you can buy and put in your garden and solve vertebrate pest problems. And even though you can buy those things, and they'll tell you they'll solve them, they won't. So let's talk about some principles, and I hope by the end of this class you'll know why it's true that you can't buy a device or a machine that will solve problems. First of all, what makes a pest? And this doesn't just go for vertebrates, it goes for all pests. Pests are human inventions. The animals didn't make themselves pests. A ground squirrel is very happy doing what it does. And a gopher in your lawn is doing exactly what it's been programmed to do. It is not doing something wrong. It's not bad. So a pest is a human conception. We figure it out. We say it's a pest because it's causing us some economic damage if we're farming and it's eating our crops. It might be causing damage to the values of your property, just making big holes in the ground or causing erosion. Aesthetics, it just doesn't look nice. Bird poop all over your walkway right in front of your door. So these are the kinds of things. And remember, as master gardeners, you're going to be dealing with all different kinds of people, and they will have different tolerances and perceptions of what's a pest. I might think of squirrels in one way, and you might think of them in a very different way. You may tolerate them. You may want them in your yard. I may not. And I'm not wrong, and you're not wrong, and I'm not right, and you're not right. It's just what we perceive. Also, the biology of the animal will help determine whether it's going to be a problem for you as a homeowner or gardener. And then the ecology of the system that they're living in will affect whether they're going to be a pest or not. So first of all, one of the most key elements about wildlife is that they have what we call habitat requirements. They have to have a place to live, and usually that place has to fall within the requirements that they have evolved with. So if you take us, people, we have certain habitat requirements. There's not many of us living on top of a mountain. It's too cold, it's too windy, there's no water, whatever. It doesn't meet our habitat requirements. So every animal has a requirement for food. They have a requirement for cover. They have some water requirement, although that doesn't mean they always have to have standing water. some of the rodents, like ground squirrels, probably never go drink water out of the creek. They get it from their food. They get it from dew. And then usually there's some special requirements that animals might have, a nesting site that they need, or a perching area, something like that. So every animal is different. They all have certain requirements to live and be successful. Also, if you look at nature, how many of you have heard that we are destroying the balance of nature by doing something, building the Auburn Dam? You know, I mean, you hear that. It's not true. You can't destroy the balance of nature. You can definitely change it. You can make it a different ecosystem, but you can't destroy it. And that's because animals adapt, and it may not be good habitat for some animals, but it's good for others. So, for example, this building destroyed the habitat for ground squirrels. They won't live right where this building is. But it improved the habitat for house mice. More of them could live here. So what have we destroyed? We haven't destroyed it. If you look at animals, they have a way to deal with change, to deal with perturbations in their environment. So if the rabbit there, density means the density, the numbers of rabbits in an area. And that will change, and nature is always trying to fill up an area, if you will. So when the numbers of rabbits goes down, there's more food available for them, there's more cover for them, and they will have more babies. And the babies they have will survive better. We can show that in the lab or in the field where we can manipulate populations, and we'll show that ground squirrels will have bigger litters if there are fewer squirrels in an area. Those litters will survive better. So what's happening is the density will change. As the density goes down, natality goes up. We have more babies. Immigration, new ones will come into an area. And all this is related to trying to fill up the site. If we take this room as our example, and you as the, I won't call you pests, but as the people, this room has, what, about 45, 50 people in it right now. It seems to be at what we would call carrying capacity. That's the number of animals that can live in an area without destroying that area, that can live there comfortably. So about 45, 50 people can live in here or be in here comfortably. If half of you leave, now there's a lot of vacant seats, and if people were milling about outside, they would say, oh, there's an empty space in there. I'll come in and fill up the room. If somebody opens the door, they want to find a seat, they open the door and the room's completely filled, they won't come in here. If there's too many people in here, some will leave. Okay, so that's what, when we talk about the balance of nature, that's what nature's trying to say. Well, how many should I put in a room? 45? Okay, that's what we're going to do. If half the seats are destroyed in this room, nature will say, oh, I'm only going to put 25 in the room. If we get more seats, I'll put 75 in the room. So nature is always trying to fill up habitats with animals that are adapted to those habitats. When people talk about destroying the balance of nature, what they're really talking about is what we think of as the room, what we would like it to be by building a dam, by putting a shopping mall here. We're changing that. So that concept, you need to think about it, that nature is a very dynamic concept. And so in your garden, for example, when you plant plants that have that make more food available, you can get an increase in numbers of animals, pests. If you take some of those pests out, the ones that are remaining will do better. And so it's often something that you have to deal with over a long period of time. Now let's look at how animals, and if you look at most of the pest animals like ground squirrels or rats or mice that we deal with, how do they repopulate areas? If you take, this is a death rate curves. The ecologists do funny things, but What this is, it says if I start out with 100% of the babies, what is my strategy? So a lion or people, our strategy, we have a few babies, we invest a lot in them. I have 2 girls in college. I know about investing a lot in our babies. Hopefully they'll live a long time and then they'll die off at old age. Rabbits, on the other hand, take a different strategy. They say, I'm going to have a lot of babies, I'm not going to invest very much in them, and I'm going to hope that a few of them will survive. And certainly if I've had them in an area where there's a lot of food available, a lot of them are going to survive. So my strategy, and the strategy of most pests, vertebrate pests at least, if you look at them, their strategy is a lot of babies, most of them aren't going to make it. You know, ground squirrels have 6 to 8 babies, most of them die before the first year. That's just how it is. But if things are right, if conditions are right, those babies will survive. So that's their strategy. So what difference does that make to you? What it says is you can't just do something once and solve a problem. If you have a rodent problem in your garden, it's usually not as simple as just taking that one rodent away, because the ones that are remaining will quickly repopulate an area. The carrying capacity, we talked about that, is the numbers of animals that can live in an area. It can vary over time. Once you understand that your garden has a certain capacity for rodents, and we really don't, you know, we're not going to say, well, we can have 3 gophers in our yard or 5 ground squirrels. But the point is that there is habitat. You've created some habitat. Maybe there's natural habitat for certain species. So you know you've got the habitat there, a potential for a pest problem. So then what do you have to do? The first thing you have to do is identify the animal. And you'll get this all the time. Somebody will call up and something's burrowing in my lawn. Help me. What do I do? First thing you have to do is find out what the animal is. Sometimes that's not too hard. You take something like a jackrabbit, is an animal that is large. It runs around in open areas. It runs around during the daytime, and it's a pretty distinguished looking animal. So those are often identified. I've got jackrabbits. I saw one. All right? So that can be one way. With many animals, however, we don't see them as readily. This is ground squirrel burrowing activity, and I can see that there's a burrow there and there's a lot of runways going out from the burrow, but you may not see the animals. Now, ground squirrels, I think, are pretty easy to see, but some people don't see them that often, but you will see the sign of an animal. So that's another thing you can ask people. Okay, you've got something eating your fruit. What have you seen? Have you seen trails? Do you see holes in the ground? Do you see mounds of dirt? Do you see where is the damage occurring on the tree? Is it fruit taken in the tree, or was it dropped to the ground and taken? All of those things can give you clues as to what animal it is. Of course, we always can look at the droppings of animals, and I'm sure that over your time as a master gardener, somebody will bring you a little envelope or something with some droppings. You know, what is it? It looks like crap to me, but, you know, it's not that easy to take out of context that little vial and say, that's a Norway rat, or that's a roof rat, or that's a pocket gopher. Now, if it's in the context, like this is rabbit droppings, and, you know, if you saw that and you saw some trails in the grass, and this was like at the cross of 2 trails, then I'd be pretty sure that's rabbits. You bring that in an envelope, it could be some other things as well. Okay, understand the damage potential. What is the problem? Who cares if these animals are in your yard? Is it something that you need to worry about? The farmers often are dealing with economic issues. Ground squirrels compete for forage with cattle. And so sometimes it's a known fact that people don't want a certain species in their area. You may, if you manage a golf course, or you may not want any pocket gophers in turf areas. So sometimes damage potential is just, I don't want any in here. And that is a legitimate position for you to take. Second issue about damage potential is knowing where the animals are. Sometimes they're living right in your home or your garage or your garden. And so, you know, I can see there's a ground squirrel burrow right there, right under the tool shed or whatever. But sometimes they're not in your property or on your property. So you may have a situation like this where you've got some rodent pest over here crossing over into your property. And that commonly happens, and it makes for a more complex solution because of several factors. First of all, you can't go over into this property and do something, set traps, put out poison baits, shoot animals, whatever you're going to do, because it's not your property, and you can't do that. So you may have to do some kind of a perimeter system. You may want to put up a fence to keep them out. You may want to put bait stations, and we'll talk about those techniques. But the main thing is you can't just look at your garden and say, I don't see any pocket gophers in this area, so I don't have to worry about it. You need to look around. So that's another thing that you can ask people when they say, you know, I've got such and such a problem. You know, what's next to your, are you in a residential area, or do you back up against the oak woodlands? That'll make a difference, or it could make a difference about what kind of pest you've got. Then you need to understand what various pest species are capable of doing. If you look at, I mean, how many of you grow cherries? Okay, and how many of you that grow cherries have had the birds come in and take your cherries? Okay, but did they kill your tree? Usually not, although it sometimes happens if big birds come in and they can break up trees and things. But the point is, there are some kinds of damage that just, you know, well, you're just not going to get as much of your crop. Maybe you won't get any of your crop. But in the end, you know, you're still, you know, your tree's still there, and it serves its purpose, and maybe next year you'll get some. There's other kind of damage that can occur, and this is a pocket gopher damage. The gopher burrowed down underground, got to this tree, and you can see that he's girdled off, or she has girdled off that tree and killed the tree. That tree will die. So this does happen. And that's a real serious problem because, you know, it's not like, well, I didn't get any cherries this year because the jays got them. You know, that's a frustration. Now you've got a dead cherry tree. That's worse in most books. Okay, so that's damage potential. Is it going to be an inconvenience? Is it going to be a little mess on my driveway? Or is it going to undermine my garage and cause it to cave in? Okay, damage potential. And then, of course, there is the question of how people define damage. For me, and I'll let you know that I like ground squirrels. I do most of my research on how to control them, so but I respect them a lot. They're a neat animal. I studied them in graduate school. To me, that's not a pest situation there. That's a good thing. But I know a few people at least don't like squirrels in their bird feeders and would think that's a pest that they want to deal with. So you need to find out what your client, where they're coming from. You know, you've got, because some of them will say, well, I don't want to hurt the squirrel, I just want to get it out. Keep it away. And my feeling is, you know, what I have to do is be honest with people and tell them as best I can how they can deal with their problem. And if they don't want to hurt them, if they don't want to use any poisons, that's fine. You know, I'm not going to try to say, well, you know, you really need to use some poison in this. But I'm also not going to say, yeah, we can put up a little something and keep them away. You know, I might say, you know, it's going to be really hard for you to deal with this. You know, you could take the animal and trap it and remove it from the area. But if you don't want to do that, maybe you're just going to have to live with it. So find out what people are wanting and thinking. understand the pest species. Virtually everything that I know of to deal with vertebrate pests is species specific. Even though there are some baits that you can buy that on the label they will list maybe 10 different rodent species that could be controlled using that bait. If you understand the bait, you have to understand the animal because the animals have to eat it. So you have to understand the pest species you're dealing with. Some examples: pocket gophers live underground virtually all of their life. They're eating the underground parts of plants, so the damage potential is going to be damage to roots and root crowns. And you're not going to see them. And if you're going to try to trap them or poison them or exclude them, you're going to have to deal with this underground habit that they have, because they're not going to come up above ground into a trap or into a bait station or anything like that. When should you control animals? This is a very difficult issue for farmers. A lot of times it's all based on economics. How much is it going to cost me if I let them live in my crop? How much will it cost me to control them? When I control them, how much crop will I save? And so they get these nice curves. The population starts to grow very slowly, then it grows very rapidly, and it will level off. So they talk this the threshold level. They've got to control it somewhere down here, because if it gets past this point, it'll cause them more damage than what the pesticide will cost. That doesn't really work very well for garden situations. Usually, the damage that these animals do is such that you want to exclude them from the garden. So when you looked at pocket gophers and killing the trees, you know, how many of your trees are you willing to let get killed before you do something? And if you decide, you know, they took one tree, now you're going to stop them, will you be able to stop them soon enough so that you don't lose another tree or another tree? Some of the methods for control. Habitat modification. We talked about carrying capacity. You probably wondered, like, what is he talking about this for? The point is that habitat modification is a key way to deal with some vertebrate pest problems. Taking the room as my example here, if I wanted to get rid of half of you, one way to do that would be to take out half the chairs. I might not say anything more than just take out half the chairs, and some of you eventually would say, you know, this isn't interesting enough to have to stand through it. You know, I could maybe sit through it, but I can't stand through it. Okay, but maybe some of you will persist. So then I'm going to turn off the air conditioner, and now it's going to start getting hot and not as comfortable. And then a few more of you will probably say, this is not worth it, and leave. Maybe some would even give up their chair and leave. All right? What we're doing is we're doing habitat modification. We're making the habitat less desirable for the pest species. And you weren't pests, I just used you as the example. So habitat modification is one way to deal with it. Rats and mice, very commonly, the first thing we do is clean up what they're eating. You know, are they eating dog food? That kind of thing. If you can put that in containers where they can't get to it, that's going to help solve the problem. So first, habitat modification. Won't work for all animals, and we're going to go into some specifics where it does and doesn't. Population reduction. Could we trap them? Could we poison them? Could we fumigate them and reduce their numbers? This is a controversial area because some people don't want to trap them, some people don't want to poison them, some people don't want to use pesticides, and you know, if that's how they want to do it, then that's fine. But this is a way to deal with vertebrate pest problems in gardens. Behavior modification. Could we change their behavior? Frighten them away. Make whatever we're trying to protect not desirable to them. Doesn't taste good anymore. Or make them think that a predator's lurking and going to eat them, and so they won't come in your garden. That area, behavior modification, is the area where a lot of people concentrate, and we'll talk more about it. Exclusion, could I fence them out? Could I do something to protect an individual plant? Could I net off a tree to keep the birds out from the cherries? That's another way. And none of these methods are foolproof. Oftentimes, if you can use them in combination, you can find and have better results. Let's talk a little bit about habitat modification. That seems like a good thing. I didn't have to kill anybody or even hurt anybody. I just had to move the chairs out. No pesticides. Everybody thinks that could be a good way to go. But remember that habitat modification has impacts on other animals as well. So if I change the habitat and make it undesirable for species A, it may also be undesirable for some other species that we wanted. And a real good example is meadow voles or meadow mice. We can get rid of them by weed control. Disc up all the weeds and they won't be in that area. They don't like bare ground. But pheasant, for example, if you're into pheasant, don't like that, no weeds either. So you got rid of the voles, you also get rid of the pheasants. So it's not without its own environmental costs. Here's the example, these meadow voles, and I've got some slides of them, but they're little mice that like dense vegetation. That's how they protect themselves from predators. And so when you have a weedy orchard, for example, they live in there very nicely, and one of the things they do is they go to the trunks of trees and they girdle it. Rodents like to girdle things. Now here was a farmer, he wanted to do weed control. Probably somebody told him you need to get the weeds down because the meadow voles are going to ruin your trees. But he didn't really understand the biology of the animal. He was doing something for habitat modification, but he didn't truly understand what he was trying to do. So he disked his orchard, and he actually, I think, made the situation worse because he drove the voles to the only remaining habitat, which was right at the tree. So here was a case of not really understanding. Great, good habitat modification, except you didn't understand the animal and what you were trying to do in your habitat modification. If I just said, oh, meadow voles do weed control, he did weed control. He didn't put the two together. Behavior modification. This is a fun one. Could we scare it away? Could we plant something else that it would like? And there have been a lot of gardeners, a lot of scientists who have tried this. I'll plant a row for the squirrels and a row for me. The problem is most of the pest species don't understand that very well, and they get out, they get into your row. If you, they don't eat that much in most cases. So if you could get them to just eat certain ones or eat the whole plant. I mean, gophers are famous. They eat, they girdle that tree, the whole tree dies. If you could get them to eat the whole tree, they could last forever. Okay, and then repellents. Repellents are usually of two types. One is a taste repellent. So I'm just trying to make this, what I'm trying to say, my camellia bush, I'm just trying to make it taste bad so deer won't eat it. And then another is to make them think that the odor is something they don't like. And that could be a noxious odor, or it could be, a lot of people are trying predator odors. One of the things that happens with us, it happens with me, we start thinking like humans and applying that to rodents. So you all would think that if a mountain lion, if we smelled that there was a mountain lion in this room, we would probably be looking around. We would be a little bit worried about that. Okay, because as humans, we know a lot about mountain lions. We read about them in the newspapers. We hear about attacks that might have happened. So we're putting all that together. We know we shouldn't be smelling mountain lions in here, but we do, and so we would be frightened. Okay, with vertebrates, it doesn't, I don't think, at least, it works that way, because they've had to live with mountain lions. If a ground squirrel or even a deer, every time they smelled mountain lion footsteps or mountain lion urine, they panicked and ran away. What would their life be like? Because that's in the environment. So repellents, you need to think about what are you really trying to do from the rodent's perspective. Okay, let's just show you a few examples. Exclusion. These are thin wires that are strung above a trout raceway where they're growing trout. This is exclusion. It's pretty open, but what it is they space that so the herons can't or won't fly through that wire and get down into the pond to get the fish. So exclusion doesn't always have to be, Loctite exclusion. And certainly some of the birds learn to beat this system, but in general, it is a way to keep birds out of a pond. Some birds. In recent years, and always somebody's coming up with a new gimmick or a new thing or a new trap. I mean, that's probably some of you are thinking about it, and that's how innovation happens. So please keep doing that. But when you read about it in a magazine, even if it says tested by the university, be a little bit cautious and think about these principles. This is a hawk kite. It's a helium balloon that suspends a effigy or a kite, looks like a hawk. And the idea is, thinking like a human, if I was a bird, I know that hawks eat birds, I know I'm a bird, I know that's a hawk, this is not a good place for me to be. And a scientist who I know decided he would test this. So what he did is he took that hawk kite and he suspended it above a bird feeder. And he measured how much bird food he put in there, and then he went to some other bird feeders that didn't have the hawk kites, and he measured how much food was in there. And then he let this experiment go, and he had replicated it, and what he found is, in fact, these things did repel birds, that the amount of bird feed eaten at the feeder was less when you had one of these things flying around it. So everybody took that and said, we found the answer. But what has happened, or what happened was, it wasn't really the hawk kite at all. It was what we call neophobia, fear of new things. Okay? There was another case. How many of you have heard or read about coyotes eating sheep? Okay, so just take it as a fact that coyotes do eat sheep. Now, some people don't believe that, but they do. All right, so there was a sheep rancher who was very upset. He was losing about 15% of his lambs. Lambs every night were gone to coyotes. So he read in the National Wool Grower magazine that there was a new product called Sheep Guard shampoo. And Sheep Guard shampoo worked like this. You brought your sheep in, you shampooed them with this shampoo, and then you let them go out into the range again. So, this was an older guy, but he was, okay, well, he'll try it. So he does it. He brings all his sheep and lambs in, he shampoos them all up, he lets them go, and then he let them go, and then they went over the night, and then the next day he went out and he counted them. And he found out that sure enough, none of them were killed by the coyotes. And he, again, I found the answer. The next night, only a few were killed. And then the next night, they were back up to the level that they had been before the Sheep Guard shampoo was used. What was the Sheep Guard shampoo? It was a neophobia reaction. The coyotes, these sheep smelled differently. And they were a little bit frightened of that, but that fright, that fear, soon leaves the animal. So most of what you see in magazines and things where people are trying, there's a little frightening divisive sometimes, after a very short period of time, they won't work anymore. Okay? And I'll talk with some more specifics on that. Pesticides for vertebrate pests. The acute toxicants are materials that an animal feeds on, like one feeding and it dies. So anybody have an idea of an acute toxicant that you might use in a garden? Arsenic isn't used anymore, but it's similar to arsenic. It's, instead of A, it's S. Strychnine. Strychnine. Okay. Strychnine is a single feeding, one mouthful or one feeding of that bait causes the animal to die. So that's called an acute toxicant. There are other materials that are multiple feeding toxicants. These are anticoagulants. They simply cause the animal's blood clotting time to get so long that eventually it internally bleeds and dies. If you have gone to the grocery store or to the hardware store and bought some rat and mouse bait, some decon, you're buying the anticoagulant baits. So that's what everybody uses around their homes and garages. Okay, the question is, does that anticoagulant dehydrate them? And this is a statement that's made by a lot of people that sell it, pest control operators, that first of all, if you have a rat in your house and you poison it, what might happen? It would die in the wall. And would that be a good thing? No. All right, so people have suggested that these anticoagulants cause the animals to get thirsty and then go outside to seek water. There's no evidence that that's true. In the lab, when we've done anticoagulant studies, I haven't noticed any increase in the amount of water these animals are drinking towards the end of their lives. So I'm not comfortable telling people that you can use these baits in your house. Don't worry about an animal dying in the wall because it's going to go outside to drink. I would definitely not say that to them. You know, if they said, well, I heard that, you can say, well, the specialist that talked to us said that that may or may not happen. And I would definitely suggest to people that they don't use bait in their house because of that. Fumigants are materials that are making a poisonous or a suffocating gas, really the only in the burrow system of the animal. And the only fumigant that's used in home and garden situations is the gas cartridge, at least by non-professional pest control operators. The gas cartridge is a smoke bomb, and you can buy those. Some ag commissioners sell them, and also some are available in hardware stores. With fumigants, you need to be aware of the fact that the gopher hole may go underneath a building, for example. And there have been cases, in fact, cases of death where people have fumigated people inside buildings by fumigating gophers outside. So it's something that you need to pay attention to and not just willy-nilly fumigate because you have gophers in an area. And then repellents we've already talked about. Yes?
What is the stuff that the pest companies use when they say it smells like peanut butter or sticks they throw in the attic?
Okay, the question is, what is the stuff that pest control companies use? It's sticks that smell like peanut butter. I don't know specifically, but my guess, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, is that would be an anticoagulant bait made by a manufacturer. They've made it in an extruded bait. They put in the aroma of peanut butter because everybody thinks peanut butter is a great thing as bait. And so if we put it in our bait stick, then that's going to attract the rats.
So once again, there's no guarantee they're going to run away, run out of the house.
No, and I would be very hesitant to even suggest that they were going to, much less guarantee it. Okay. Feeding behavior. It's important to understand feeding behavior. Remember neophobia. We've already talked about what neophobia is. It relates to feeding behavior. First of all, animals have feeding preferences just like you. You know, you're all the same species. You know, you're all ground squirrels or you're all pocket gophers. Same species, yet you have different feeding preferences. Animals have the same thing, and those preferences are probably not as diverse as us, as humans, but they certainly can be dictated by what's available for animals. So to give you an example, ground squirrels love seeds, and usually seed-based baits can be very effective for ground squirrels. Ground squirrels even love more almonds. And if you happen to have ground squirrels in an almond orchard and the nuts are ripe, you can't get them to eat seeds because they would rather have the nuts. So their preferences are important, and there is no bait out there, none, that you can say, oh, that's the best bait. The squirrels really like that the most. It may be a good quality bait, but you can't guarantee that, yes, you know, they ate this in my house, so they'll eat it at yours. And what I do for people that are going to use baits is they need to get a little bit of it and try it out. Usually in a home setting or a garden, you know, if you are using baits, you don't buy that much. But in some farms, I've had farmers buy, you know, 1,000 pounds of bait. And then they found out, you know, their squirrels don't like that bait. And, you know, 1,000 pounds of bait is expensive. All right, neophobia. When you put a bait out, the peanut butter bait stick, oats, whatever, usually, what is that? That's a new thing. And so very often animals will have a neophobic reaction to it. They won't take to it very well. They won't gobble it up. Now, just to give you an example, if I brought oysters on a half shell out today, and I put them out here and said, well, break, everybody, file through, they're on me, you would have, I guess, a little bit of neophobia. These are new things. If these were just old Winchell's donuts, you'd probably just, I've seen you master gardeners eat. You'd just come through and they'd be gone in a minute. But oysters on a half shell, a few of you who've had lots of experience may take them right away. Some people would, you know, okay, well, I'll take a little bit. Okay? What is that? That's neophobia. You have it too, just like a rat. Okay. Now, bait shyness. What would bait shyness be? Well, I can use you all as a good example here. In my oysters, I'm also serving Calistoga water. And so you get an oyster and a Calistoga water. Go back to your seat. And then let's say about 4:30, you start getting sick. What are you going to say? It's the oysters. Are you going to say it's the water? Why not? Because you know water. Water's safe. You have lots of safe, what's called safe exposures to water. You don't have a lot of exposure to oysters. Even if you've eaten them before, you know you haven't probably eaten a bunch of them the day before and the day before. So your sickness, your mother always said when you got sick to your stomach, what did you eat? Okay? That's aversive conditioning. So, now, I didn't tell you, but I actually put some lithium chloride in the water. Okay? It wasn't the oysters at all. But tomorrow when I come back and I still have some oysters left over, and I say, you know, by the way, I got another good deal on oysters, so everybody at the break have some. How many of you do you think will eat them? None. You're bait shy. Okay, this can happen. You can get trap shy. So if you set a trap, an animal doesn't get killed, but say gets injured, say the trap goes off and whaps him in the nose, that animal may never go near a trap again. That's why it's important to do these things not in a haphazard way. Bait shyness can occur if the animal eats the bait, gets sick but doesn't die, then they won't eat it again. With the baits that we've been talking about, strychnine, that could happen. It doesn't happen with the anticoagulants. Why doesn't it happen with the anticoagulants? Right, they get sick days later. So if you get sick next Wednesday, you probably aren't going to blame my oysters. Okay? You'll blame somebody else's something, you know. And if it wasn't a strange food, it's a new food. It's like, well, it must have been that hamburger I had at McDonald's, because that's the only place that I ate that I can think of other than at my house. And you never get sick from your own food. That's right. All right. So feeding behavior, think about that. So What does an animal want? These are oats. The ground squirrels love them. Another picture of them. Trapping. Okay, here's another biggie for master gardeners. Live traps versus kill traps. Okay, a live trap like a tomahawk box trap, wire box. The animal comes in, now you have a pet. Okay. Kill trap, of course, a mouse snap trap, boom, the animal's dead. All right, so there can be controversy about that. People sometimes don't want to kill the animal. They would rather live trap it and give it to the neighbor, release it down at the park, take it to the schoolyard, whatever. All right, you need to know, as University of California employees, getting no money, we have all the responsibilities. It is illegal to trap and release animals in California without a permit from Fish and Game. So if somebody says, well, I'm going to box trap these ground squirrels, I'm going to release them down in the creek, that is, I think you should say, the Fish and Game Code does not allow you to trap and release animals in the state. You can be spreading diseases, you can be spreading pest animals, you can be putting animals in areas where they don't belong, where they can't survive, where they're not equipped. There are a lot of good ecological reasons why you shouldn't do it. But the main issue is it's not legal. And a lot of people will do that, and you're not expected at all to be the wildlife police. But at least don't suggest, well, you could release it down at the park. All right? If they, and I think you have a handout, there are two handouts. One is just a whole list of contacts, web pages and things that might be helpful. The other is a list of agencies that deal with wildlife problems like public health, Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife Service, etc. So if you, say, had gray squirrels that you wanted to deal with, you would need to get a permit from Fish and Game, and they would more than likely tell you what you had to do once you trap the animal. And they may tell you, you have to go release it down at the Auburn Dam site or whatever, okay? But generally, try to discourage people from trapping and releasing. Disposal. What do you do with an animal? If you've live trapped it and you want to comply with the law, then you have to euthanize it. And you have to euthanize it in a humane way. Drowning is not humane. That's what we used to say. Take the trap, put it in a bucket of water, and you're done. That's not considered humane anymore. Humane method of killing animals by the AVMA is what they call rapid cervical dislocation. I didn't break their necks, in other words, or euthanize in a euthanasia chamber with carbon dioxide. Okay, that's not that hard to do. You can even take a little ice chest or plastic garbage can. If you have a can, everybody's got a canister of CO2, right? And you just pour it. You just shoot it in there, and they'll suffocate. I beg your pardon? A blow to their head is considered a bullet to their head. Yes, you could do that if you can, if it's legal to shoot in the area that you're shooting at. It's hard on your traps, though. Yeah. But I guess my point is that if people want to, they got to think about what are you going to do with this animal. Now, some SPCA groups will take trapped animals, possums or raccoons. So, there may be some alternatives in your community, and that's something that you as a group could find out about. You could call the SPCA or animal control in your county. Do you take trapped animals, wild animals? What should we recommend to people if they trap a skunk? And, you know, and so it's better if you, you know, as a group, or maybe assign it to somebody to kind of find that out, because every county is different. And if I tell you, well, here, you know, just call up the ag commissioner and they'll come get your skunk. Well, that might work, and it does work in some counties. Others, I'm not taking your skunk, you know. So,
Can I ask a question?
yes.
If you catch something in a live trap, can you let it go in the same place you caught it?
Okay. If you catch something in a live trap, can you let it go in the same place that you caught it? I believe the answer is yes, because you are releasing an animal that was inadvertently captured. Predators and diseases. There are predators that eat, like barn owls eat gophers, they eat meadow voles, but most of the predators and prey in our system have co-evolved, and they have not, the predators aren't able to get the numbers down below what would cause you damage in the garden. So generally predators could be encouraged, but they should not be considered the answer to most vertebrate pest problems. We don't have any diseases. People ask you, isn't there a disease I could give these things? There are some diseases that they have. They might be giving them to you. Raccoons and raccoon roundworm, deer mice and hantavirus, ground squirrels and plague. All those are very serious human diseases. So good vertebrate pest control, know the potential pest problems, alter the habitat if possible to make it less desirable to that species, monitor for damage and be aware of that and take action that's necessary. And I like people to follow up and continue monitoring. If you think of the vertebrate pest problems that may be in your garden and you keep looking for them, you can usually have a successful garden without having much vertebrate pest problems. Always remember, I think it's important, that everybody has different attitudes about pests and species, and your job is to give the best information you can to people to solve their needs. Okay, let's quickly talk about ground squirrels and pocket gophers. The California ground squirrel is a diurnal animal, runs around during the daytime, very interesting, lives underground in a nest, doesn't feed underground. It's not eating your plants under there, it's just that's its home. It's a colonial animal, it lives in groups, so usually if you have a squirrel or two, if you do nothing, you will get more, pretty much guaranteed. This we've already talked about. They're a rangeland, that's where they evolved from. They like open habitat, and so the kinds of things that we've done as humans have made it much better for squirrels here than it was before we settled in California. They don't like flooding, so what we do, we channeled all the rivers, put the dams up, no more flooding, more ground squirrels. They're an excellent climber. Somebody yesterday asked me, well, how do you tell the difference between a ground squirrel and a tree squirrel? The main thing is approach it and frighten it and see what it does. If it goes down in the ground, it's a ground squirrel. If it goes in the tree, it's a tree squirrel. And you could go to Davis and get a PhD and be able to tell people that too. But it's the truth. Okay, they'll go out on little limbs, things that you wouldn't think could support them, and they've taken all the nuts on that almond tree. In fact, this particular orchard was 50 acres. They had taken all the nuts in the whole place. So they can get pretty severe. Other crops that they like to chew on, they're just about anything. They're pretty omnivorous. Here's a tomato field. We don't think of them as really damaging tomatoes, but they're living in this tree line here, and you can see that they've eaten all the tomato plants out to here. They're not after the tomatoes, they're after the plants just when they sprout up. Poultry, any kind of poultry food, they'll capitalize on. They like to girdle trees, especially little ones. They'll sit up in the crotch of a tree and chew on the limbs. There you can see the girdling. Just a point about girdling. We have rodents that girdle trees. You can have the pocket gophers girdling right underneath the soil. Meadow voles will be right at the soil surface. Ground squirrels up to, say, 4 inches to 6 inches. And then rabbits will be up here. So that's another thing that you can ask people, well, where is this girdling occurring? And that can help you determine what animal it might be. Just the hole in the ground can sometimes be quite annoying. And they do modified drip irrigation systems. They like to chew on things. All the rodents' teeth grow. They continue to grow. And one of the things that I do in my lab is one of my favorite tasks is to assign a new graduate student to clip ground squirrel teeth. Because often in the lab, if they're not chewing on things, their teeth will grow and they'll get too long and they won't be able to eat properly. So we have to go in with wire cutters and just clip their teeth. And it's, I mean, most people just can't stand to think about doing that. It absolutely doesn't hurt the squirrel.
The preceding program was part 1 of 2 parts, each part an hour long. There is support material available at this website, including quizzes, handouts, and lecture outlines for all presentations. Consult the UCTV programming guide for the date and time part 2, and other lectures in the series will be shown.
It's the definitive guide to gardening, produced by the University of California. The California Master Gardener Handbook contains over 700 pages of in-depth information on topics such as soil, fertilizer and water management, plant propagation, weeds and pests, lawn care, landscape design, home vegetable gardening, and the wide variety of garden crops that are grown in the Golden State. The chapters in this handbook provide helpful information on selecting varieties, planting, growth cycles, pruning, irrigation, and harvesting. The California Master Gardener Handbook is available along with other gardening publications on the A&R Catalog website at anrcatalog.ucdavis.edu.